keep up with him. Connor's going to be sending stuff on the group me for updates because next week you guys have a lab practical. So he will do a nice study session for you. We have planned on him doing like a 10-question mock practical too. So just, you must. Yeah, because everyone has now taken it. So you can come see me and look over the exam if you want. All right. Looking at today's objectives, woohoo, the heart. Name and describe the parts of the cardiovascular system, including both the circuits as well as the organs. So when we think about a circuit, we have two primary circuits of the heart. You also have kind of a circuit within the heart, which is coronary circulation, but you're going to have a pulmonary circuit and a systemic circuit. And so that's going to help to make sure that the blood is oxygenated, get rid of CO2, but also make sure that oxygen is taken to the tissues and CO2 is removed from those. Next, explain the roles of the heart and describe the various types of blood vessels. We will go into a lot more detail about each of the types of the blood vessels later, but for right now, I need you to understand the different types, what type of blood they are carrying, and kind of what their color is depending on which circuit we're in. I'll explain more in a few minutes. Next, describe the precise location of the heart. Now, this is an objective. Usually in this course, we study more of the physiology, but there are certain anatomical things I want you to know. This will be on your exam. You can write that down if you want. All right, next, distinguish between the coverings of the heart and the layers that compose the wall of the heart. So you have basically 3 layers that we talk about as a covering. There is one overlap, and then there are 3 layers to the wall of the heart. If you need to stand up because you're falling asleep, please do so. I'll have to take points off. All right, next, identify and locate the major parts of the heart and discuss the function of each one of those parts. So we'll be going over all of those. Then we want to trace the pathways of blood through the heart and the vessels of coronary circulation. So this brings me to the point, did you guys see where I posted an extra opportunity assignment? All right, so that is talking about going through the heart. You can create a nice little story. You can pretend like you're going through an amusement park, going on a journey. I don't care, whatever you want. You can make a rap, do a song. I had a really good rap. Do you guys know Ash Dean is my TA for Anatomy 1. She made a really cool rap last year, so you can see her if you want to listen to that. But anyway, that can be used for lab or lecture, not both, but you can choose one or the other. So I have it posted in both places. So you should submit to the class that you want to put it on, okay? All right. Anyway, we should be able to explain the pathways of blood, and I literally lay it all out for you at the very ending of the PowerPoint, so should be good. All right, let's talk about the general characteristics. Thinking about the cardiovascular system. So I color-coded everything because I like color. Hopefully you do too. If not, sorry, but not sorry. All right, so the cardiovascular system is composed of the heart and the blood vessels. A lot of times people think about organs as just being like liver, stomach, heart, but your bones are organs, and also blood vessels are organs. Lymphatic vessels are organs. Are they a certain entity that contains a variety of different types of tissues working for a particular function? Yeah, then guess what? They're an organ. All right, so if you want to define the heart, it's hollow, right, or at least partially. It's a hollow, cone-shaped muscular pump that is going to generate force to transport things like respiratory gases. That's primarily CO2 and O2, but remember how we talked about before with the blood, we also have nitrogen in there. It's also going to transport nutrients back and forth as well as waste, and hopefully the wastes are going out and they're not collecting and becoming very abundant in the bloodstream. So that's going to wreak havoc, especially with your brain. Anyway, we have blood vessels, so they're going to be a part of the system, and their job is going to be to transport the blood throughout the body. So right now, we can break this down even further. We'll do that later, but 3 main types of vessels that I want you to understand for right now are arteries, veins, and our capillaries, and we can see those over in the diagram that I have showing the basic flow of blood. All right, so arteries. What you want to think about is arteries transport blood away from the heart. Now, in general, whenever you're young, they usually tell you arteries carry oxygenated blood and veins are blue and they carry deoxygenated blood. Is that true for all over the body? Every part of the body? No, it is not. So it is best to think about arteries carrying blood away and veins are carrying blood back towards the heart. So with the systemic circuit, which is where the heart is going to be transporting blood to all of the different body tissues, yeah, that's true. Oxygen, we need to head to all the tissues. And then coming back is going to be deoxygenated blood. But if we're pumping blood that has come back into the heart from the body tissues, if we are pumping that out to the lungs, would that make any sense to be pumping oxygenated blood out to the lungs? No, because that's the purpose there. So we have arteries going away from the heart to the lungs, but they're going to be pumping deoxygenated blood. Does that make sense? So the systemic circuit follows the general rule that you've heard probably for all of your life, but the pulmonary circuit does not, going out to the lungs and back. And we'll talk about that more later. But that's two rules that you need to understand. Now, commonly, pretty much everywhere through the body, we're going to go from arteries to arterioles to capillaries to venules to veins. And so capillaries are going to be important because they are only one cell thick. And they're going to be transporting blood between the arteries and veins. And since they are one cell thick, if you guys remember studying in Anatomy 1, we had simple squamous epithelium. One layer thick, very flat cells, and there's like no extracellular matrix, and they're like tiled together. That's really great for gas exchange because those gases can just go passive diffusion, whoop, right through that layer. And it's helpful because if you had me for Anatomy 1, I had a whole nice diagram on it. But with passive diffusion, it's based on the concentration. So you should have a lot more oxygen in your bloodstream, we'd hope, compared to your tissues. And so there's an exchange. Oxygen wants to go where there's a lower concentration. So through the capillary, it's moving out, and CO2 is moving in the opposite direction. Isn't it beautiful? It doesn't even use energy. It's a perfect system. True design. Anyway, so we have exchange of nutrients, gases, as well as waste through that system. All right. As I kind of mentioned before, we have two primary circuits. So we're going to have the systemic circuit, and we are going to have the pulmonary circuit. So the pulmonary circuit is going to be carrying oxygen, poor blood from the heart to the lungs, drop off CO2, pull in oxygen, and then we're going to transport it back through our left atrium into the left ventricle, and that way it can go out to the body to refill our tissues with blood. But when it goes out to the tissues, that's the systemic circuit. Going in, out to the lungs and back to the heart, that is our pulmonary circuit. So that's what I was talking about. The arteries and veins they carry the opposite blood that you usually think about. And it's simply because we're trying to oxygenate it going out to the lungs. The systemic circuit, as I mentioned before, is transporting oxygenated blood to all the different body tissues. We get an exchange of waste products, including CO2, and take it back to the lungs so we can expel CO2 and take in more oxygen. All right. So those are your two main circuits. We'll talk about, it's not really a circuit, but we'll talk about coronary circulation, which is going to be circulation actually occurring within the heart. Because is the heart a muscle? Does its cells also need to be fed with oxygen? Yeah, absolutely. And guess what? Just going through the chambers, that's not going to cut it. That is not feeding our cells. So we have the heart's own vascular system, and you'll get to see that in the lab tomorrow too. We'll label a few of the vessels. You can't see them very well on I think we're doing sheep hearts tomorrow. They're pretty big. Anyway. All right, so looking at the organization of the heart. So we have the right side and we also have the left side. If you are having trouble staying awake, please do something to stay awake. All right, so the right side is going to pump to our pulmonary circuit. So if you think about it, this is a person in an anatomical position looking at you, right? So what side is this right here? That is the right side. So the right side of the heart, see, we're going up through, this is the pulmonary trunk, into the pulmonary arteries. So right side is pumping to the lungs. The left side is going to be over here. And so the left side is going to have the left ventricle pumping into the aorta to go up to the head, up to the arms, down to the legs, everywhere else outside, all the body tissues. Oh, and then obviously we're going to return it through the right side. All right. So I told you need to know this. So the size and location of the heart. The size is obviously going to vary within the individual. Someone that is 7 foot tall is going to have a larger heart than I am. And then also depending on, there are some genetic predispositions and also just diseases that can cause the heart to become enlarged. But on average, you probably heard this before, they say that your heart is about the size of your fist on the left side. Depending on the individual, it's about 14 by 9 centimeters, give or take. That's not as important as where I want you to understand where it's located. So it lies within the thoracic cavity. And then if you remember back to talking about body regions in Anatomy 1, so this is going to be the thoracic cavity. And then within that, you have right here was the mediastinum. And then the bulk of the actual heart is going to be within the pericardial cavity. All right, and where does this take place? It goes from approximately the second rib down to the 5th intercostal space. Wait. I said the broad base lies beneath the second rib. Oh my goodness. Is the second rib down here? Shake your head like this. No. The second rib is up here. It's not a typo. This is the base of the heart. So base does not mean bottom. Base actually means the widest part of the heart. That's why I asked you that question, because I wanted to emphasize it. So the base is up here. That's a region. You guys know what this is called right here. Starts with an A. The apex of the heart. So that comes down to a tip at the bottom. So the tip is going to be approximately right here. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the 5th intercostal space. Sorry, I got it the wrong way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It goes both ways, 5. But anyway, so it's count from the bottom or from the top. All right, so that's the 5th intercostal space, and so the top of it is starting approximately at the 2nd intercostal space, close to the second rib. Again, that's approximate. It might change a little bit depending on who the individual is. All right, it's a cone shape, and as I mentioned before, it is a hollow dome. It would also be considered to have a double pump. I'll get to that in just a second. All right, so we have right and left halves. So that's defining our 2 pumps. I don't know if you guys realize it or not, and it's not your fault. It's just because of how they teach it. So we talk about blood flow, and I'm sure that you understand, we start at the right atrium, then you're going to go through the tricuspid valve and into the right ventricle, and then you go up. Anyway, you're going all through the heart, right? But did you realize that it's not pumping right, left, right? It is simultaneous. So those 2 pumps are actually going together. You don't think of it that way because you always think about, we're going blood flow through the heart. We have to understand that every time those ventricles are pumping together in synchdom, as we call it, the ventricles are pumping together in synchdom. And when it's actually really cool, you don't realize this, but the heart, it actually twists when it pumps a little bit. So it kind of goes in this circular motion. That's just the way that the fibers run. So it kind of pumps like that. But anyway, both chambers are going to pump at the same time. And so you're actually having blood doing this with every single pump. It is going through in a circuit, but 2 different pumps are going on at the exact same time, so it's simultaneous. Fun things. All right, let's look at the coverings of the heart. So one is going to be the pericardium, which I mentioned the pericardial cavity. So the pericardium, or the pericardial sac, is right inside of that cavity. And so this is just a covering over the heart and the proximal ends of the blood vessels. So that's just talking about, if you think about proximal being closest we can get to the trunk, think about the middle of the trunk. So the vessels are coming all the way down from here. So the proximal end would be closest to the trunk. So that's just right at the top of the heart. So it's going to cover those ends. And so we have 3 major portions of the pericardium that we need to understand. One, we have the fibrous pericardium. So it's going to be our tough outer layer, and it surrounds a double-layered serous membrane. We talked about a lot of different types of membranes when we were in AMP1. Actually, there were like 3. One of them was a serous membrane. Serous membranes are a folded over layer. So that's where we're going to have the parietal pericardium and the visceral pericardium. And in the center, we have a cavity. Can you guess what type of fluid is going to be in that cavity? In the pericardial sac. I thought I had it up there. All right, anyone want to guess what type of fluid it is anyway? Oh, great job. Pericardial fluid, go figure. All right, we can call it serous fluid because it's a serous membrane, or pericardial fluid. That is going to be within this cavity. It's actually the visceral pericardium right here that he's going to be secreting fluid. I don't think the parietal does. I know the visceral does though. Anyway, all right, so we have the fibrous pericardium. That's going to be all the way on the outside. Lots of connective tissue here, and that's going to be right here. That is going to anchor the heart to the different structures around it. When we do the dissection of the heart, this is removed. You will not see the fibrous pericardium. It's removed for you. But if you opened up a critter that has the same type of structure we do, you're going to see it. All right, then we have our parietal pericardium. Think about parietal, kind of think about perimeter. It's going around the outside. So it is deep to the fibrous pericardium, and it is the outermost layer of that serous membrane that I mentioned. So we have the fibrous pericardium and then the parietal pericardium. Now this is a serous membrane, bless you. So we have the parietal pericardium, and then it curves around, and on the bottom part, which is actually the outer part of the outer wall of the heart, we'll get to that in a minute, is going to be the visceral pericardium. And right in between that, where all the fluid is going to be the pericardial cavity. We will go over this again in lab. You'll actually have to label it and whatnot, so don't get too hung up on it now. All right, now let's move to the wall of the heart. So over here on this diagram, you'll be labeling this in lab. We can see where we have our layers that we just talked about. So on the very outside of the heart, that's not actually really part of it, we have a fibrous pericardium. And then we have the parietal pericardium, the cavity, and then the visceral pericardium. Oh, look at that, hot dogs. The visceral pericardium is actually the epicardium as well. So part of that membrane is the outermost layer of the heart. So you can call it the epicardium or the visceral pericardium. They are the exact same thing, right? Then moving in from there, we have the myocardium. What does myo mean? Very good. Oh me, oh my. All right. So myocardium is going to be the middle layer. It is the thickest, and so it is composed of cardiomyocytes. So if you think about it, that's where the force of contraction is going to be coming from. And that's what's going to help us to pump the blood out of the chambers. Now, if you know anything about the heart, thinking about what we said about like pumping the blood out to all the tissues, which chamber do you think is going to have the thickest layer of myocardium? You have two atria, two ventricles, right and left of each. Which one do you think is going to be the thickest? Any guesses? You think it's going to be one of the atria? Nope. So which chamber is connected to the aorta? I don't know. It is the left ventricle. It is going to have the largest amount of myocardium because it's pumping into the aorta, which has to go out to the entire body. So it's going to have to be able to accrue the most force to pump that blood out. All right. So we have the epicardium, myocardium, and then we have the endocardium, which makes sense, kind of closest to the inside, endo. So it is going to be our protective inner lining. It is very thin and found in all the heart chambers. Now, I want you to think about something. That endocardium, what type of texture do you think it's going to have? Is it going to be rough, smooth, fibrous, woolly? What do you think? Fuzzy? It's not fuzzy. What'd you say? Good thought. So it is malleable because it's just one thin layer. But I want you to think about this. Remember what we talked about with the blood vessels and where we had to have a balance between anticoagulants and coagulants? we would want that in the lining of those chambers to be very smooth because we do not want to build up of anything in there. So that's going to be an extremely smooth layer. All right, questions about the outer layers beyond the heart and also the layers of the wall of the heart? All right, I have one question. Which one, which layer is both part of the wall and the outside? Very good. That's going to be the epicardium, or we can call it the visceral pericardium. All right. We'll work on that more in lab. All right, this is a chart, again, just kind of going over the same types of things that I went over, looking at the composition of each one of these layers, as well as the function of it. You really do need to know the function. So if you think about it, the epicardium is a very protective layer, and it's also what's going to be producing that serous fluid that's going to be on the inside. Do you understand why it's important to have a serous layer with serous fluid in there? You actually have something very similar with the lungs too. And it's, excuse me, so those layers are not scraping against one another, because that could cause a lot of pain there. In fact, pleurisy occurs specifically within the lungs because you have a similar serous membrane there. And if there's an infection, those layers literally every time you breathe scrape against one another. I know this very well. My brother, when he was in 9th grade, he was trying to break the 5 minutes for a mile. He ended up doing it, but he got pleurisy while he was on the track team. And that was the most excruciating pain, like he explained that at the time, that he had ever been through, because every time you breathe, you were getting pain. So you can get on antibiotics and hopefully that clears up the infection. You'll be fine. All right, so myocardium. It's going to be contracting to pump blood through the heart chambers. And then we have that protective inner lining being the endocardium. This gives you a few more details if you want to know them. All right, looking at the heart chambers. In general, we say that we have 4 chambers of the heart. Textbooks kind of go different ways on this. I'm going to say there are 4 chambers. You can technically say there's 6, though. All right, so this is going to be the portrayal of a human heart. Tell you this ahead of time. We are not going to be dissecting human hearts tomorrow, okay? We're going to be dissecting an animal's heart. It is similar, but I can tell you that the ventricles and the atria are a little bit different. They're a little different sizes, so don't let that throw you off. I will give you tons of pictures on my PowerPoint tomorrow to help you with that, and you'll have to label it. But anyway, all right. So we have a left ventricle and a right ventricle, and we have one of our coronary arteries coming down that's going to separate those two. And then we also have atria at the top. This right here is part of one atria. You can't see it very well, and this is going to be the other one. The right atrium is much more prominent than the left when you are looking at the anterior side. And we'll look at that more in lab. It's a lot easier to look at a heart than a 3D image. Anyway, notice up here, we have what we call the auricle of the left atrium, and there is an auricle of the right atrium too. I think it's this flap that's right here. But do you guys remember labeling the ear, what the auricle was? What is it? Or you just remember hearing the term? Hearing it? This was the auricle. So the auricle or the pinna. So these are the ears of the heart. All right. And what we're talking about there is, if you think about it, whenever you are increasing blood pressure, whether it's by you are running upstairs or you're really getting your heart pumping, we may have an excess amount of blood pumping up into the atria all at one time. And so we have these auricles that are actually basically like expansions of the atria so that the atria don't explode whenever your heart rate significantly increases or you have a very large blood volume, something like that. So we consider those, some books consider those chambers. It's kind of not very conventional. So the main chambers that we want to know are the atria and the ventricles. Atrium is one of the top chambers, and then atria are 2. So they're thin-walled upper chambers, and they receive blood that's returning to the heart. Ventricles are going to be thick-walled lower chambers that are going to pump blood into one of the two sets of arteries going out, either to the lungs or to the rest of the body. Like I said, we also have those auricles, which are just expansions. All right, questions about chambers? Because next I want to take that and I want to talk about what type of blood is going into each one of them. All right, going one by one. We're going to start with the right atrium. Anybody happen to know what this vessel is back here? Starts with a V. Okay, good. The vena cava. So we have, and it's okay if you don't know this. I'm just checking. All right, so we have the superior vena cava. So this is superior. What's this one going to be? Inferior vena cava. So each one of these, this is the right atrium. So we can see here's where blood coming up from the inferior is going, and here's where the superior is going. Oh, but look, there's another hole there, and it's not dealing with the valve. So remember how I said we have a special circulation going through the heart? We'll see this in diagrams to come later, but we have veins that are going to actually collect in what we call the coronary sinus on the posterior side of the heart. Well, that's deoxygenated blood, and we have to get that oxygenated again. So guess what? It comes into the right atrium so that we can get it all the way out to the lungs again through. This is the opening of the coronary sinus. So we have three different, essentially, holes where blood is going to be coming into the right atrium. From there, we're going to go down through. This is going to be the tricuspid valve, or the right atrioventricular valve, or right AV valve. All right, so it's going to receive blood from the right atrium, and then from there, we're going to go up through the pulmonary semilunar valve. You know why it's called semilunar? Because the valve is shaped kind of, you think about the moon, it's like half-shaped moons. So this is the semilunar valve, and we're going to go up into the pulmonary trunk, into the two pulmonary arteries, and out to the lungs so that we are oxygenated again. And once we're oxygenated, we want to get back in the heart. So then we're going to go through the left atrium. So it's going to be receiving blood from one of the four pulmonary veins. So you have two pulmonary veins on this side, two pulmonary veins on that side. But understand, these are both going to where, you know how I said, like, if you're looking at the anterior side of the heart, you can see a lot more of the right atrium. At the posterior side, you can see a lot more of the left. So these vessels are both going into the left atrium from the back. Does that make sense? All right, so then we want to take the blood from the left atrium through, we can call it the bicuspid valve, the mitral valve, or the left atrioventricular valve, or left AV valve, into the left ventricle. And here, we're going to go up into the aorta and send it out into the systemic circuit. But you remember how I was asking about which chamber is going to be the thickest? Do you see what I mean now? Look at how thin the wall is. It's not thin, but comparatively thin this wall is over here. Look how massive that is. So we have to have a lot of muscle to be able to pump that blood out. Something I'll go ahead, it hopefully will help you. Some people get confused which one is the tricuspid or the bicuspid valve. So I have to think about, yeah, technically the left chamber is very large, but it doesn't leave a lot of space for the valve because there's so much muscle there. So we don't have space for a large tricuspid valve, 1, 2, 3 cusps. We only have enough room for a bicuspid valve. That's just how I keep it straight in my mind. You're also welcome to call them the right AV valve and the left AV valve for atrioventricular. But those are our four major heart chambers. I've been on a roll. All right, questions? It's not too bad. It's just kind of putting pieces together, things that you've learned in the past. All right, now we're to the valve. So as I mentioned, we have two atrioventricular valves. That's the tricuspid valve and the mitral valve. And we have two semilunar valves, and that's going to be the aortic semilunar valve and the pulmonary semilunar valve. We'll get into more of this later when we talk about how the heart pumps and the movement from one chamber to the other regarding blood. But I'll go ahead and mention now that part of this system and part of contracting, so we noticed that these are two different types of valves. So this one involves, we call it cusp. This is a semilunar valve. So this is more like a cup shape. But down here, you notice that we have these strings attached. These are chordae tendineae, and they are attached to papillary muscles. Whenever the ventricles contract, we have to make sure that these cusps don't flop back in there. So these papillary muscles contract to pull that valve down. So we see that on both of these sides. Whereas when we're pumping up from the ventricle, that's going to push this semilunar valve open. And the cool thing about it is once the pressure starts to fall, it causes it to close on top of each other. Yes, ma'am.
Would that be like mitral valve prolapse, or is that different?
Yes. So mitral valve prolapse is going to occur on this side though. And so what happens is sometimes there's a break in these tendineae, the capillary vessel is not working properly. And so the valve, whenever the ventricle is pushing blood into the atrium, there's a murmur because it's heading back up into that chamber. Yeah. And that's actually like the most common type of valve complication. So very good. Yes. All right. Questions about the valves? All right. This is just another diagram, and I gave you a chart looking at each one of the valves and their purposes. So just as review, the tricuspid valve is going to be preventing blood from moving back up in from the right ventricle into the right atrium during ventricular contraction. Same thing with regard to our left side with the mitral valve and moving back into the left atrium. And then the pulmonary valve, you can also call it, I think it's helpful to name it the pulmonary semilunar valve, is preventing blood from moving from the pulmonary trunk back into the right ventricle. And I can't really describe it very well. Whenever it's relaxing, it's going to be down here. And same way for the aortic valve into the left ventricle. This is kind of cool. I think it helps you to be able to see the different types of valves and what they're looking like. Also, whenever you go to dissect your heart tomorrow, and I'll explain it again whenever I have something in front of me, but whenever you're looking at your heart, it's not going to be cut like this on the top, but if you are on the anterior-most side, the vessel that is going to be closest to the front is the pulmonary valve. Now, I want you to think about this. The pulmonary valve is not going to be carrying as much pressure going into the lungs as the aorta is out to the rest of the body. So which wall do you think is going to be thicker? The aorta, right? Because it's carrying a lot more pressure. So whenever you go to try to figure out anterior side, posterior side, trying to figure out your different vessels, you know that the vessel coming out of the top that is the most thick, that's going to be the aorta. Okay, so that's one way to look at it. Another way to identify the right and the left side is you'll be able to see a difference between the thickness of the left and the right side. So that'll help you to orient yourself. Warning, please let me look at the heart before you decide to cut it in half. This only happened to me one time the whole time I've taught anatomy. Somebody cut the heart instead of so you could see it like the other diagrams where you're cutting, it's a coronal section, so you have the front and the back. They literally split it down the other way. And they were like, we can't see anything. I looked at it and I was like, yeah, you didn't have me check it. So please feel free to ask me questions tomorrow before you slice and dice. They still got to see everything, but I had to let them look off of someone else's. All right. So looking at structures within the heart, we have the interatrial septum and the interventricular septum. Intra means within, inter means between. So where is the interatrial septum going to be? Separating the right and left atrium. The interventricular septum is going to separate the right and left ventricles. You can't see, you can. It runs right along, right along the aorta up there, the atrial. And then the interventricular septum is going to be right here. And we'll talk more about its purpose and electrical signal conduction when we get to the conduction system. Okay, we talked about how we have the superior and inferior vena cava. They are going to be returning oxygen-rich or oxygen-poor blood back to the heart. Poor, oxygen-poor blood, because that was coming from the body tissues. It's probably CO2-rich, but oxygen-poor. And then we have the chordae tendineae, which I mentioned before, which actually you can see in this picture. It's kind of cool. This is the tricuspid valve, and these are all the chordae tendineae. That's pulling that down to make sure that we don't have prolapse, like Taylor had mentioned before. Except that was we were talking about the bicuspid or mitral valve. Anyway, all right, and then we have 4 pulmonary veins returning oxygen-rich blood from the lungs to the left atrium. So we talked about the return of both of those. Let's see. Okay. We also have something, your heart technically has a skeleton to it. And what we mean by that is we have a structure to keep it in its basic shape. So we have dense cartilaginous rings, which is why we call it the skeleton. You think about the cartilage that goes along with your bones. We call that part of the skeletal system. So this is the skeletal system of the heart. And so this is going to surround the orifices, which just means the openings to the atria as well as the ventricle. So it's holding it in place so that we can keep that open. Nothing is coming in to where blood would be unable to pass. And this is also going to be important because it provides the attachment sites for the heart valves, right? They've got to attach to something to hold them in place, in addition to different muscle fibers. Another important piece to that is it prevents excess, you call it dilation or dilatation. So we don't want the heart expanding too much. So it's going to help keep that in place. So everything else below it and above it can function properly. So the rings and also all the other fibrous masses, including with the interventricular septum, this is part of the structure or the skeleton of the heart. It's kind of its backbone, so to speak. Not super important in my opinion, but good to know. This is a great diagram to help you to understand blood flow through the heart. You can probably see it better on your PowerPoint, but after I point it out to you, you can see all of the different arrows and showing you the passageways through. If you choose to do my extra opportunity assignment, this is something that can be helpful to make sure you're hitting all the different spots and just helpful to know. All right. You will want to plan to see this diagram again because I'm going to give you an activity probably Friday to do over the weekend, and it's a worksheet I actually made up myself that goes through the circulation through the pulmonary and systemic circuits and also coronary circulation. It's on the back of the worksheet with the heart. So let's kind of go through just one time together. I also color coordinated it talking about the oxygen poor blood versus oxygen rich. So oxygen poor is in blue. So we have oxygen poor blood coming from the superior and inferior vena cava, as well as the coronary sinus entering the right atrium. I don't have those drawn on here, but I'll give you almost this exact same paper on Friday, and you can even draw them in if you want. All right, so blood is going to flow from the right atrium. What valve did we say is right here? Anybody? Very good. The tricuspid valve or the right atrioventricular valve. And then we're going to move into what chamber? Right ventricle. From the right ventricle, we are going to use that pump that has a lot of pressure to go through the pulmonary trunk into the pulmonary arteries. And that's going to take it out to the lungs. Oh, I'm way ahead of myself, sorry. Anyway, we'll go over more later. It's really interesting though. So whenever the right atrium, so it does pump, but actually because of gravity, and there's a time whenever it's able to fill during diastole, 70% of the blood actually comes down into the right ventricle, and so the right atrium actually only has to pump about 30%. And at that point, that push is going to keep that valve open, and then guess what? As soon as pressure builds up here, super cool, that valve is going to slam shut, and that's why we have to have that chordae tendineae there so it doesn't prolapse. All right, anyway, So we're going out, wow, sorry. All right, so the right ventricle contracts, the tricuspid valve is going to close that orifice. And as pressure rises in the right ventricle, the pulmonary semilunar valve is going to open, all right, because that's your cup shape right here. So as pressure starts to accumulate, it's going to open like this. And obviously it'll be fully open when the highest amount of pressure and blood is going up through. So blood flows into the pulmonary trunk and then into the lungs. We drop off carbon dioxide. Oh, and then we change colors. So it's going to pick up oxygen and we are then a more reddish color. Blood is going to return to the left atrium by what? 4 pulmonary veins. Very good. They're paired on each side. And then the blood is going to flow into the right atrium through the mitral valve into the left ventricle. Left atrium is going to contract that last little bit because we don't want to keep that in there. We want it all to go down, sending the blood into the left ventricle. Then it's going to contract. And when it contracts, that mitral valve is going to close, hopefully not prolapse, and blood is going to flow into the aortic semilunar valve because it is now opening because of that buildup of pressure. And we'll go through the aorta, transporting oxygen-rich blood to the body cells. I think we'll just go over this again whenever we come back together. I typed out for you, you're welcome, the entire kind of thing that I would expect you to understand for blood circulation. Now, should you just memorize this? No. You should understand it. You should take a diagram and ensure that you understand, because if you say it like a story, you're going to understand it, which is why I gave you that extra opportunity assignment, because I think it's helpful. All right. This is just a reminder. I posted the extra opportunity assignment. I was only going to assign it to lab, and then I decided that you can choose which class you want it for. So create a clever rap, story, poem. I had a really good poem last year too. You can even do a video if you want, explaining the blood flow. I give you exactly what you need to include in it on the instructions. So please be asking for help. If you need any, chapter 14 homework is overdue. 15 homework is already up. Feel free to do it if you want to, along with a smart book. Please make sure you finish anything dealing with lab prior to 5 p.m., prior to tomorrow. And then, again, I posted exam scores. If you want to look over your exam, sign up to come meet me. You have to do it if you scored less than a 70. Is there any questions? Kaylee, it's 150. I made it. Woo. You got through all the material.
Did it.
All right, guys. Have a happy rest of your Monday.